Hello, my name is Diversai, and this is the champion profile for Annie. Some notes. Number 1, I'm talking about her from a 3-star and level 30 perspective. As of this recording, she does not have a full constellation, so I have no idea what she's going to look like in the future. Number 2, we're talking about her in the context of Aurelion Sol. Of course, Lysandra and Swain are nonsense. Number 3, I know nothing about the lore, as always. This is Annie, the Dark Child. She is a 1-cost 0/2 champion from Noxus. Her card reads Attack, I deal 2 to my blocker. If it's dead or gone, I deal 2 to the enemy next instead. This ability is called Molten Shield, and it is elemental. On level up, her level up is I've seen you play 6 fast spells, slow spells, or skills. When I level up, create Tibbers in hand, and when she levels up, her card then reads I deal 3 to my blocker on attack and stun it. If it's dead or gone, I deal 3 to the enemy nexus instead. All of these are going to be upgraded by 2 due to her Pyromania 2 power, which is her 3-star constellation power. Her champion spell is Annie's Disintegrate. This will come with Mana Potion and Elixir of Skill, so it will cost 1. It is a fast spell, and what it does is you pick a unit. The next time it takes 1 or more damage this round, kill it. And of course, create an Annie in deck. Tibbers is going to be a 4-cost after she gets a discount from her champion level. It is a 5/5 with Fearsome, and on play, stun an enemy, then deal 2 to all stunned or damaged enemies. This will be 4 damage instead because of her constellation, and that is Annie. This is Annie's starting deck. We have Annie, of course. We have Disintegrate, which is her champion spell. It has Mana Potion and Elixir of Skill, so it costs 1 and it draws a card. It is also elemental, although that doesn't really matter. We have Legion Saboteur, who is a 1-cost 2/1 with Speed Wrap, so it has Quick Attack. On attack, deal 1 to the enemy nexus. That's called Sabotage, so with Pyromania 2, which is Annie's constellation, it'll do 3 damage. This is a very strong card in the deck. Now you have House Spider with Chain Vest. It's a 2-cost 2/2. When you summon it, you get a 1-cost 1/1 for free. This is one of your defensive tools because it generates 2 blockers. You have Spell Slinger. This is another defensive tool. It can also be used offensively with Tibbers. Play stun an enemy. If it is already stunned, deal 2 to it instead, so that'll be 4 with Annie's 3-star power. You can also use this with Guile and then drop it, and that'll do 4 damage. You have Death's Hand with Summoning Beacon. This can be used offensively and defensively. The 3-cost fast spell that deals 2 to an enemy nexus, and 2 to an enemy and 1 to the enemy nexus, so that'll be 4 and 3. You have Mana Soul Student, who is a 3-cost 4/5, has Spell Shield and Savage Shield, that's why it's 4/5. Each round, the first time you play a fast spell, slow spell, or skill, I play Magic Embers. Magic Embers is an elemental skill which does 1 damage to the enemy nexus, but with enemies 3-star it'll do 3. You have the Prefect, who is a 3-cost 2/5 with Giant's Belt. It has Overwhelm. When you play a fast spell, slow spell, or skill, grant me +1/+0. This can grow pretty fast because you play a lot of fast spells, slow spells, and skills. And you also have Captive Greyback with Shadow Totem. This is a 4-cost 2/3 with Overwhelm. Attack, I deal 3 to my blocker, so that'll be 5. If it's dead or gone, I deal damage to the enemy nexus instead. And because of Shadow Totem, you'll have 2 of them if you play it on an attacking round. This does do a lot of damage, but it does cost 4, which is a little slow for Annie. For Annie's Constellations, she's not a 6-star champion, she's only a 3. You have Pyromania, your spells and skills deal 1 extra damage. That's kind of the core of her deck. Her 2-star is Playful Trick, +1 starting mana, and round start create a Fleeting Guile in hand. Guile is a 1-cost slow spell that stuns an enemy. This is one of your primary defensives, really good against Katarina and monthly challenges. And you also have Pyromania 2, your spells and skills do 2 extra damage, so this is her 3-star ability. And it is how you play her and win the game. Annie is one of the champions that has a campaign quest. So her campaign, the first one is a 0-star called Whispers in the Fire. This is in the Noxus region. If you complete that and then you get Annie to 2 stars, you can do Annie Goes East. This is a 2-star adventure, and you fight Lulu. This is in Ionia, and if you complete that, you get the Green Clay Shade Leaf Relic, which is a rare relic and has support, grant my supported ally elusive. So if you have any 2-star, make sure you do that. Just pick up that Relic, although it doesn't get used a lot. Probably underrated, to be honest. Overview. My competence is high. I love Annie. I play her a lot. Although that does mean that I usually play her in kind of specific ways, so there might be people who do more experimentation than I do with her, because I've gone to like a level of comfort. Champion Reliance, so you can play her in 2 different ways. One is like a control, and the other one is burn. If you're playing her as control, she's less important in the deck, but still fairly important. You're going to be stalling with other things and then finishing off with magic embers from Mana Soul Student, probably. And then if you're playing her for straight burn, then you want to have as many copies of her as possible. For board space, she doesn't use up a lot of board space usually. It's actually one of her weaknesses. Her hand space is fine if you're playing control, and if you're playing burn, you will have more cards than you can play in your hand, which is very bad, and sometimes you end up burning your warning shots. Cards played per turn are going to be 2 or 3. If you're lucky, you get to play more. For safety, I think she's fairly safe. You are able to do like 4.5 and 5.5 weekly nightmares with her. You can even do 6.5 on some of them, depending on what powers you roll. So I would say she's fairly safe. You have Fleeting Guile to stun your strongest enemy. You have Disintegrate to remove big threats that you otherwise would not be able to remove. House Spider is a pretty good blocker, and Spellslinger is an additional stun. You also have Death's Hand, which does damage and also creates a unit. And yeah, so it's usually safe to also kill Annie because you're going to be wanting to replay her. So turn to win is usually 1 to 3 for burn and maybe like 4 to 6 for control. For burn, you're going to want to play warning shots, and you're going to do that with the Dreadway Chase Gun, and then finish off the fight with Death's Hand or Mana Soul Student. And usually you can take like fairly good attacks as well, because she does a lot of damage with multiple shield. For control, it's basically the same, except you're not using warning shots, so you use Disintegrates to kind of play the game a little bit slower. And yeah, you could either go to the Prefect, finish with Mana Soul Student, or Captive Greyback is another option. It's just slower. There's no real reason to it unless you're doing like an adventure that has probably more than 50 health, in which case you can't burn out the Nexus instantly. So speed, she's very fast. She's the fastest champion for doing low-level adventures like the Swift Scout, which, I mean, you might not be wanting to do, but let's say you needed to finish the Battle Pass really quick, she can get through all of the Swift Scout in like 2 minutes. And then if you're playing her control, she's medium fast. She's still fast. I think her power is a 10 out of 10. She can do basically anything. And for fun, she is a 10 for sure. For me personally, I like the burn archetype. So her deck strengths. The Pyromania 2, which is her Constellations, synergizes extremely well with her deck. Basically every card takes advantage of it. But it also synergizes with powers you can find in Relics. This can often lead to one-turn wins. Like I said earlier, she's good enough to kill 4.5 and 5.5 weekly nightmares. I have a lot of videos of her doing exactly that, even without epic relics. And yeah, that's it. Her weaknesses are that you need to draw Annie, and if your opponent is going wide, it's going to be hard for you to block. Your units you don't usually want to block with because they're kind of your win condition. So like Mana Soul Student, you never want to block with. House Spider's not big enough to block fearsome units, and Spellslinger, I mean, is fine to block with, but then he's dead. Yeah, I mean, you're probably not attacking with him anyway to use him defensively. So that gives you some problems on the higher level adventures. So like the 6.5 star would be a problem in certain 5.5 stars. I would also suggest not using her. You also have no way of healing, so you don't want to take damage. And because you're usually going to play a burn focused build, if the enemy has a lot of Nexus health, then you actually have to play the game, and that's kind of bad for her. So your play pattern, best way to play her is with a Dreadway Chase Gun. That creates 2 warning shots, which do 3 damage each because of Pyromania 2. If you have Luden's Tempest, that goes up to 4. You can use 2 Dreadway Chase Guns and Luden's Tempest, and that'll deal 16 damage every time you play Annie. So your pattern is going to be play Annie, kill Annie, play Annie, and every time you do that, you're doing 16 damage. This is why Echoing Spirit is good. A lot of times, so depending on what Nexus health, I really vary my relics because, you just want to kind of match what the Nexus health is. If 16 damage isn't enough to kill it, you're going to want to play something maybe a little slower, a little safer. You also have additional burn from Legion's Saboteur and Death's Hand. This helps you end games immediately. And like I said, anytime you kill Annie, you get to replay her for more warning shots. If you find something like Shadow Totem or Undying Legion, those powers or Stabilizer or Immortal items, then you get even more value. So if you're planning on finding any of those things during a run, you never want to take more than 1 Dreadway Chase Gun because your hand will just fill. If your opponent has a lot of health, this is probably still the best way to do it, although I tend to substitute in Guardian Angel, and then I do Guardian Angel, Dreadway Chase Gun, and Luden's Tempest. And but you do need to start thinking if that happens and be defensive using your stuns. Maybe don't play any immediately so that you have some blockers. Use Guile instead and Spellslinger, and then you want to get Mana Soul Student out as soon as possible so you get that additional damage every round. And in those cases, you're going to tend to want to keep Annie alive just so you take extra advantage of the Luden's Tempest. So these are all relics that I think are pretty good on her. Echoing Spirit gives you extra copies, also makes your Disintegrate free, so it's a free spell and draws a card, which is pretty good. You can use Dreadway Chase Gun, that's obviously the typical way to play her. You have Luden's Tempest for the same reason. Loose Cannon's Payload is something you can do. Creating a bunch of pow-pows that have 2 extra damage helps you remove the enemy board. Ground General's Counterplan, you can make an extra copy of Annie. You can use this either to be really free with your Disintegrate, or to block with her and then replay her immediately. You have Shock and Awe, she has a lot of 1-cost allies, or at least one 1-cost ally, and she is herself 1 or less. And so you can use Shock and Awe, and that gets boosted by Pyromania 2 and also Luden's Tempest. So you can make kind of like a pseudo Misfortune if you do it that way. You have Guardian Angel, which when she revives, you get more warning shots. You have Icon of Valir, if that's something you want to do. That works on Molten Shield and also Magic Embers from Mana Soul Student. I think it probably also works on Tibbers coming down. I didn't check that out for sure. Doesn't really matter. I almost never play Tibbers. And of course, you can play her as a Guardian or build because she costs 1. Additionally, if you really wanted, you can do Oath of Guardians and Double Star Gem. She's a low-cost champion and gets all the advantages of being low-cost. So here are different relic builds. As you can see in basically all of them, I'm using some sort of variation of Dreadway Chase Gun and Luden's Tempest. But you can do that with Echoing Spirit, you can do it with Guardian Angel, you can do it with Grand General's Counterplan or Shock and Awe. And then like the long play build is probably Grand General's Counterplan, Archangel's Staff, and Luden's Tempest. That is going to give you, a lot of safety in your rounds, and you can take advantage of Disintegrate, and you have a lot of extra spell mana to play things like Death's Hand and whatever you find during your adventure. So those are relic builds that I would suggest. For powers, you have your normal mana powers. Wild Inspiration is particularly good here because you create that Guile in hand. Making it cost 0 is very good, but Spellslinger would obviously do the same thing. Mana flow is less important on her than normal, because you can usually win in round 1, regardless of whether or not you have extra mana, but it never hurts to have. For defensive powers, you have your normal ones, hold it, hold them off, treacherous terrain, but you can also get little buddies, which gives you that extra random poro, which gives you a blocker every round. That's kind of nice, because Annie doesn't have a wide board, you're not taking up any additional space usually. And you also have Urumi Shield, which heals your Nexus whenever you play a spell. If it's elemental, you heal it 2 instead. You do play a fair amount of spells, although I think most of them are not elemental, except for Disintegrate, which is, for offensive, obviously Duplicate is amazing. Elemental Winds is probably the best spell that you can play on, or the best power you can pick up, because it gives your spells and skills 2 extra damage. Balancing Blades will do 3 because of Pyromania 2, and also if you have Luden's Tempest on board, it will do 4. Every round generating 4 extra damage is really good. Spell Burn is good because you play a lot of spells, and like I mentioned before, Stabilize summons you an extra copy of Annie, which means you get double Luden's Tempest and 2 extra warning shots. So let's say you play an Annie down, then you stabilize, you'll end up with 4 warning shots in hand that'll each do 5, and that's 20 damage to the Nexus. And every time you replay Annie, you would be able to do that. So that's pretty good. Yeah. For items, this is a new section that I'm trying out. Farsight Alteration, of course, to make sure that you draw her. Shadow Totem does the exact same thing as Stabilize. You have Reckoner Mark, which you can use to kill her, and that might be a thing that you want to do sometimes so that you can play her more times, although I wouldn't necessarily suggest it, but you would get 2 warning shots every time that you did that. You have Hunter's Mark, or Hunter's Machete for Scout. She tends to get blocked, but if you have Scout, then you can attack twice, and every time she hits with Molten Shield, that'll do 5 damage. So that's pretty good. Spirit Stone, just to replay her. I find Mana Deposit really good on her because she's low cost. It just lets you do a little more in your first round, or every round that you have to replay her. Or if you have a bunch of her in hand and you can play her a bunch of times in the same round, that's pretty good. A Focusing Crystal, if you're trying for longer games, is good. You can make her very big very quickly because you play a lot of spells. And of course, Immortal, which is +1/+0, and Deathless. That way you can just sacrifice her for free and get more warning shots in. If you ever see a spell with Pyromantic Wake, you're going to want to pick that up. That damage is augmented by her Constellation and also Luden's Tempest, I think. So, yeah, it has to be. So you can end up doing like 6 damage every time you play a spell, which is pretty good. Tips and tricks. So your relics are going to, like I've said, are going to vary a lot with your Nexus health, your opponent's Nexus health. And then if you plan to do like long games with a lot of powers, you'll probably find one of Immortal, Stabilize, or Shadow Totem. And if that's the case, you don't want to have 2 Dreadway Chase Guns because you're just going to overfill your hand. 3 Dreadway Chase Guns never works because you have that Guile in hand, and yeah, you'll just never have space for it. When you're playing this method, you want to also avoid anything that gives you an extra card in your hand. So the Flexible Plan power that gives you draw 2 at the start will end up just eating your warning shots. So you don't want to pick that up. Also, anything with Farsight Alteration other than Annie, you want to avoid for the same reason. For Disintegrate, you can use Disintegrate to remove high health opponents, or you can target yourself and kill your Annie on a block, or maybe your opponent wasn't strong enough to kill your Annie. Or if you have a Blade's Edge, you can Blade's Edge plus Disintegrate. Depends on your needs, but you can use it on yourself to get rid of your unit to help you replay Annie. And also be aware of the order in which you play Disintegrate and, let's say, Death's Hand, since that's part of your deck. You need to play Death's Hand first and then Disintegrate, so that because the spells resolve in opposite order, they need the Disintegrate to hit before the Death Hands hit. Otherwise, you're just going to waste your Disintegrate and not kill the enemy. The AI attacks really weirdly into Guardian Angel, so sometimes they choose not to attack at all, where they definitely should attack, and you can take advantage of that. If you use Guile before you play Tibbers, you can stun and damage that unit, because Guile has a stun. If you have the Bouncing Blades power, it benefits from Pyromania 2, like I said, and Luden's Tempest, so that becomes a really strong spell. Noxian Fervor is also very good. It does, I think, baseline 3 damage to one of your allies and 3 damage to anything, so you can use it on yourself and then also the enemy nexus, and that'll do like 6 damage if you have Luden's Tempest. It also kill your Annie, so you can replay her, and then get extra damage from the warning shots that way. Like I said before, it's safe to block with her as long as you have another copy in hand. And while Annie does have 0 attack, Molten Shield does 4 naturally, or 5 if you have a Luminous Tempest, which makes her a 4 or 5/2 quick attack unit instead of what she actually looks like. Yeah. The enemies blocking her does tend to be a problem though, and that happens all the time. Another thing that I didn't write down here is Gangplank support does have warning shot in it, so sometimes you can find like a good warning shot power on top of that. You do find a nice Gangplank, and also the armed gearheads power, which gives you the 2 armed gearheads. I forget what the name actually is. Those things will grow pretty big because they have augment and playing a lot of created spells. Okay, my guess at the lore. Annie's obviously from an orphanage. She was probably a child star in a lot of musicals. Then she kept setting the sets on fire. She ended up abandoned, orphaned, and homeless. And then she got adopted by Daddy Warbucks, probably. I think there's a guy named Warwick, so maybe that guy adopted her. And then he probably burnt down her house too. I have no idea what's going on in this. I guess there's an arena, and Tibbers is fighting the prefect for some reason. No clue. But that is my best guess at the lore. And that's it. If you want to see me play Annie against Aurelion Sol, I have that video up. It'll be linked in the description. I don't even know who that chameleon guy is. Is that the Manasol student? I don't look at pictures enough. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Annie's fun. You should play her. She's really good in monthly challenges. Really good for weekly nightmares. I don't know. I think she's just a blast to play. Very enjoyable, and you can play her in a lot of different ways that are kind of the same way. Anyway, that is all for me. If you like what I'm doing, like and subscribe. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.